NVIDIA's RTX 3090 Founders Edition is by far the biggest cooler design that they've developed for their own FE cards. So what exactly does that get you in terms of cooling performance? And what about the new flow-through cooler design? I have a ton of questions that I want to answer in this video today, mostly about this massive 3-slot cooler that NVIDIA have developed for the new RTX 3090. And one of those main questions is this the first time that we might see a Founders Edition card and cooler actually outperform the aftermarket cards from board partners? Let's take a look. Firstly, a quick recap on RTX 3090 performance. Really, there are two types of people interested in the 3090. The first one is solely for that huge video memory capacity of 24 gigabytes, which despite being a $1,500 card, that's $1,000 less than the Titan RTX, which shipped with the same capacity of memory, but also slower. And the second one is solely for those who just buy the best performance that they can for each generation and have loads of cash to throw at their hobbies. Otherwise, the RTX 3080 is a much better recommendation as a high-end GPU. It's less than half the cost and literally gets you 90% of the way there for what most of you are going to be doing with it. But this is still the fastest single GPU that you can buy, and the main kind of selling point of this GPU is definitely the video memory overhead on here. 24 gigabytes of GDDR6X memory with a bandwidth close to 1 terabyte per second is definitely the reason that you should be buying this GPU. Forget about 8K gaming and forget about the 10 to 15% that you might get in 4K and 1440p gaming, although you can consider that kind of a bonus. So 24 gigabytes of VRAM is definitely appealing here, but what's also really appealing is this absolutely huge 3-slot premium cooler design. And I want to start off just by mentioning the build quality, which is really hard to convey over video, but since every aftermarket graphics card design out there is plastic, a full metal build can definitely be appreciated. One of my favorite parts about the new Founders Edition design is definitely that huge exhaust vent near the rear I/O. We've seen this on the 3080, it's pretty big there too for what is a 2-slot card, but it's absolutely massive on the 3090. And I hope we see more cooler designs like this in the future where a good portion of the graphics card heat is immediately thrown out of the case. As we've seen in previous testing, this can really help CPU thermals quite a bit. But it's important to know that not all of the airflow from this bottom fan will be exhausted from this vent and out of the case. It seems that around half of it does make its way through the cutout in the metal frame to pass through the two heatsinks in the middle. Initially, I thought these heatsinks were cooled passively and didn't really receive any airflow from either of the fans, but they definitely receive at least a bit from the bottom fan. You'll also find a sneaky NVLink connector in its usual spot if you plan to link one or more of these cards together, and this is the only GPU in the Ampere lineup with this so far. Now, I am a fan of the new 12-pin power connector. More power in a smaller footprint is always something that I'm down for, but NVIDIA really should have shipped this with a much better adapter. I mean, what is this? The stock one feels extremely DIY and it has loose heat shrink and kind of bulgy cables. It's pretty bulky as well and does add around 10 millimeters of height to the card. One thing that I definitely do appreciate though, no more green LEDs for the GeForce logo, just a nice clean white which will suit any build. There's also some subtle illumination on the underside of the card in the middle, but you're probably not going to see that in your build. And that's pretty much it. I've done a full video on the new flow-through cooler design and explained how that works, so I won't spend any more time on that in this video. But one thing I will say is that NVIDIA are using some really big fans here, some of the biggest that I've seen on any graphics card. They're both 110 millimeters in diameter, and as a point of comparison, the 3080 Founders Edition uses 85 millimeter fans, and even the Gaming X Trio uses 90 mil fans. So 110 mil fans are kind of unseen on graphics cards, and that's one of the reasons that this appears to be so big. Here's a size comparison versus the 3080 Founders Edition, 313 millimeters in length versus 285. It's also 26 millimeters taller and a whole expansion slot thicker. So the 3090 is big, but there will be a few aftermarket cards that are technically bigger in dimensions, and the Gaming X Trio is one example, 10 millimeters longer and 2 millimeters taller, but nowhere near as thick or heavy. The 3090 FE uses a unique PCB design that is essentially an expansion of the 3080 Fe. I haven't seen any water block designs for this card just yet, but there are plenty of other RTX 3090 cards out there if water cooling is what you plan to do. Now, as you could probably guess, this card isn't going to fit in many ITX cases. Any case that doesn't support at least 3 PCI expansion slots is immediately out of the question, and even some that do, like the Ncase M1, the card is still too big. Probably the most sensible compact case out there for this card, if you really need a compact GPU workstation, is the Sliger CL530. It's an 11-liter console-style case with large 3-slot card support, and this case should pair well with the flow-through design of this card, as it does have ventilation on both sides. And at least by looking at the dimensions, this should fit in the formed T1, which would likely get you the most compact RTX 3090 case and GPU configuration. It looks like it will fit, but I'm yet to actually test anything, so definitely don't take my word on it just yet. Even if you can fit it in there, the thermal design of the flow-through cooler is probably less than ideal in a sandwich layout case, but again, that's something that I've yet to test. More on that in the next video. So for thermal performance, the RTX 3090 Founders Edition runs fairly cool at just 68 degrees C, but also very quiet at a little over 1200 RPM. Remember, the board power here is upwards of 350 watts. For some context, here's MSI's Gaming X Trio, which runs both warmer and louder than the Founders Edition, but still at a very respectable and safe level. I have a feeling that most aftermarket cards will perform in this ballpark, and I'm looking forward to seeing if any models like the Asus TUF or Strix can actually outperform the Founders Edition on thermal and noise performance. Speaking of noise, here's what both cards sound like at full load on an open test bench with the microphone at a 25cm distance. I will say it's not exactly fair to compare thermals and noise directly between a Founders Edition and aftermarket 30 series card, seeing as aftermarket cards do have a higher power target and factory overclock. As you can see here, the power consumption is around 20 watts higher. Although when we compare clock speed, the difference isn't as large as you'd think out of the box, likely because the MSI card runs a bit warmer and then dials things back a bit. Overall, you're looking at around a 30 MHz difference after a sustained period, and that's nowhere near enough to make a meaningful difference on gaming performance. So really, the RTX 3090 Founders Edition is really impressive. It's really refreshing to see from a testing standpoint because it's something new and different. And it's also really appealing from a consumer standpoint because it objectively performs pretty good. But maybe it performs too good, and I think we should address the elephant in the room here. How are board partners meant to compete with this at all? Now, I'm not implying that Nvidia should just roll back to their simple blower card design and not strive to make their own graphics cards better. After all, thermal and noise performance is a large component of the overall consumer experience of a GPU. And evidently, this is the result, and it's a really good one, a really interesting and effective direction in graphics card cooling. As a consumer, I definitely know what cooler design I'd be picking for my own system, but I can't help but feel the pressure for board partners. I just really doubt they have the R&D budget to engineer and compete with something like this. Now, that doesn't seem to be the case with the RTX 3080 Founders Edition, which does seem to be outperformed by larger triple fan aftermarket card designs from board partners, but this card does have some other things going for it, like a very compact 2-slot design. And this will lead us into our next video where we'll be taking a look at how well suited this thermal design is for many mini ITX cases. Until then, a huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.